one, and you're live.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Northampton Policing Review Commission, the full commission. This is a meeting that is on Zoom. It is being recorded by Northampton Media. I hope I have that name correct. And it looks like we definitely have a quorum. And so what I'd like to do, Noah, if you could give us a roll call, that would be great.
Yeah. Booker.
Here.
Dan.
Here.
Nick.
Here.
David.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Javier.
Here.
Namdi.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Cynthia.
Here.
Carol.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
And Elizabeth. Who don't think is here yet.
Elizabeth is here. I saw her on mute. I think maybe she
She's
muted
here.
too fast.
Oh, yeah.
There she is.
Great. Awesome.
I
Thank you all.
I think she said present or here. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to take a little bit of a different turn in the meeting tonight, just because I wanted to make an announcement under the new meeting schedule. But if I can have your patience, this is the first time I've done this, so I appreciate you hanging in there with me. I know what we have to do is approve the minutes. Now, I think Noah sent the minutes out earlier today. I don't know if anyone had a chance to look at them. If we can have a motion to approve, or maybe if there's enough people who haven't had a chance to read them, we can look at them at the next meeting. What's your pleasure?
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and second. So Noah, can we do this one more time to approve the minutes?
Yeah. Where'd you go? Okay. Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Booker.
I read the minutes and I watched a recording of the last meeting. I wasn't at the last meeting, but it does reflect the recording that I watched. So I'll vote yes.
Cool. Dan.
Yes, there we go.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Namdi.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Obviously Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
Carol.
Sorry, I haven't read them.
Okay. And Chris.
Yes.
Okay, I think the minutes are approved as submitted, so thank you. The reason I'm going to just make a very brief announcement before general comment is because this has to do with general comment, just so all our fine folks that are here tonight and not part of the commission but want to make a comment. We're going to, a little bit later in the agenda, talk about the timeline that we hope you received, looking at our final weeks in preparation for the final report. And so we want to reserve the discussion about some of the changes that were made in that report, going to a weekly meeting, keeping it to 2 hours, et cetera. And we're going to do that a little bit later in the agenda, but we wanted the folks who give public comment to note that, and this can all be changed based on our discussion, but that for tonight, we would like to restrict public comment to 15 minutes. And reason being, we're trying to have more meetings, but we're trying to shorten them and kind of tighten up on the timeline because we don't want to lose commissioners at the third or the fourth hour. So if that's acceptable, that sort of puts us, with a 3-minute limitation, makes us comfortably with maybe 5 people that can talk. And then I'm going to be kind of rude and see how many more people are left to speak, that want to speak, and maybe terminate public comment at 15 minutes, but we'll see how that works. We also want to encourage you, as you have been, and we're so thankful that so many of you have been contacting us, both through NOAA, website, individually, collectively, in so many different ways. And by no means do we want to curtail public comment, but we're just trying to tighten up our agenda a bit. So having said that, public comment, as you know, is you have 3 minutes. And to say whatever, we hope you introduce yourself, and if it's not apparent, and we don't respond back in public comment. So just want to make sure for any new folks that are here tonight with us, but you are welcome to stay. You are welcome to, if there's something you need to tell us and want to get us some information, as I mentioned, you can do it through NOAA, our admin person, or you can contact us individually or collectively. There's a variety of ways, or attend our subcommittee meetings as well. So again, we will talk about that timeline a little bit later on in the agenda, but if we could move to public comment, I'm going to try to manage this through the participants. And I see we have, if you want to raise your hand, if that feature is not available to you, just try to wave or somehow so that I can see you and recognize you. But right now in the queue, it looks like we have one person, and I don't know the person, but I do know the last 4 digits of your phone is 7081. So we'd love to hear from you, and I'll start timing you. So 7081, here you go.
Hello, this is Hildegard.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Are you ready for me to speak?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I want you to pay attention to the newspaper article in Saturday's Hampshire Gazette. Above the title of the newspaper article, in section C, page 1, and very big article in page 2, section C, it says Hampshire Hope, and then it goes on to say drug courts working as a turnaround tool. And this is coming from the national government, DA treatment rather than incarceration for opiate epidemic. I have been very upset and concerned about the failure of detox in 2 government housing areas where I have lived, both in Fort Sander, where they didn't even have locks on the door at the time that I lived there, and here in Cahill. So that is very important for me to have you people pay attention to that article. Okay?
Great. Is that it, Hildegard?
That's it. I'm in G68 Cahill.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. I'm looking for some other folks that might want to talk in public comment. And Robert Eastman, you appear to be next in line here. Robert?
All right. Hey everyone, I'm Robert. I live in Ward 3. And I just wanted to speak tonight as you all approach the final few weeks of this and are making some pretty big decisions as a group. And just wanted to, I was just thinking about how we lost members of our commission. They were Black women, among others. And arguably some of the most important voices on this commission, and the exact people, this commission was charged with lifting the voices of. And, that's the inaccessibility of like city council commissions. That's a pretty obvious and major way that voices are silenced. And so I guess I would just like to ask all of you to really think about all of the smaller and more subtle ways that might be happening in this group as you enter these decision-making phases of the process. Because one observation I've noticed in these all commission meetings is that there are several people on the commission who consistently have been saying that they're not heard. And that's coming from people of, all races represented on the committee. So yeah, I just want to urge you to think about that. One other thing is, I've noticed in discussions of review civilian oversight committees that conversations of transformative justice have kind of been tacked on, and that as a potential avenue for, restorative justice. And, I heard a quote in a video I'm going to read you that I think just really points to why these things need to be separate from police. He said in the video, his name is Cody Broadway. Whoops, sorry, I lost the quote. All right, he said, a lot of people say that we have to reestablish trust between communities and police to fix this, but we must ask ourselves, and he's referring to the fact that police have a racist function. If police are so broken, what year in American history did they break it? If you're talking about reestablishing trust, can you point to the year in American history where there is a foundation of trust between the Black community and police officers? And he goes on to point out, that there isn't. So I'll leave you with that, and thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next up in order, we would have Lemmy and then Ya Ping and then Amy. So Lemmy?
Hi, thanks all for having public comment. And I think I just want to take a minute to, I've been doing some community outreach about abolition, and I just want to take a minute to share the joy and the hope and the love that comes from those conversations. I did a dialogue circle called Beyond Policing with some folks, and have just been, having conversations about various demands that Northampton Abolition Now has put out. And it's just been really beautiful to see how many people are excited about something happening in the city government, which doesn't happen very often. And I just want to point to the fact that that has to do with abolition even being on the table, and hopefully ends up as the main charge of the last report, and being the main focus, because I think I just am noticing such a different levity and joy and love that's coming from these conversations, when historically I know municipal policy doesn't ever usually bring this much joy. And I know the weeds of this conversation in this commission is tough, and I feel the intensity sometimes, and I just want to bring in some of the community light that is happening around some of these conversations that I'm having. And even with my mom, and I'm hearing people talk to their grandma who's sending it to their neighborhood listserv and stuff like that. And so it's just really beautiful, and I just wanted to share that tonight. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Lemmy. Next up is Ya Ping.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again. Also, for making time for public comment. I wanted to touch on a point that a few of us emailed the commission just earlier this afternoon with a question that I think has been on a lot of our minds, and I just wanted to bring it to public comment here in case you get into this kind of stuff tonight. But the question is, how does the commission overall, and how does everyone on this commission view and value the perspective and recommendations of the Movement for Black Lives and the perspective and recommendations of leading abolitionist organizations that have been doing organizing on the ground for the last 10, 20, 30 years, and also individual abolitionist organizers who have also been doing work in their communities to prevent harm and build better communities. And I guess this question is really alive for me after watching part of the policing practices subcommittee yesterday and hearing commissioners bring up the idea of reforms such as oversight boards, civilian oversight boards, and training, and saying that they are sort of like reforms as part of the goal that are harmless. And I wanted to make sure it's really clear that the Movement for Black Lives recommends not doing any of those reforms. The Movement for Black Lives, their policy platform says to reduce the scope, size, and power of police and invest in community-led programs that are for safety and health. And that's the same thing that abolitionist organizations and thinkers have said. And so I actually would just love to hear what individuals on this commission who persist in pushing an agenda of reforms that these lead organizations have spoken out against and saying that they're very harmful towards progress. I would like to know if the individuals on the commission who have been pushing these reforms want to persist in pushing them, what justifies the decision to do so when it is in opposition to actually the Movement for Black Lives policy platform and lead abolitionist organizers who, most of whom are Black women, who are the leaders that we look up to. And if this commission, says it wishes women of color were on the commission, it's confusing to me why these voices of lead organizations and organizers have been not really acknowledged. Like the opening of the policing practices meeting yesterday opened with looking at the complaint process from the perspective of the police, as opposed to starting with looking at the questions that these organizers pose. Thanks.
Thank you, Yaping. Next we have Amy, and then, whoops, sorry about that, and then Ashwin. Amy?
Hi, yes, I really want to give a big heartfelt thanks for everyone who's on this commission and all the work and time and energy that you're putting into all the work that you're doing. I support and I uplift everything that Robert and Lemmy and Yaping, particularly what Yaping was just discussing a moment ago, but everything that they're saying, I really appreciate what they've said, and I want to reflect that again and have it resonate. I'm a white woman. I'm a business owner. I own property in town. I'm all the things that typically when I meet or see someone who is another white business owner or white property owner, no matter their gender, tends to be on somewhat of the other side of this conversation. And so I think it's in some ways particularly important for you all to hear that I'm not afraid of crime. Can happen to any of us, right? And supposedly the police are there to help reduce crime. But in this last year, for all of the things that I read and absorb and see in my world and in the greater community world around us, all that I find, and that's not to say that there aren't going to be moments and pockets of people being good humans to other people. That happens, and it's a joy. It's a joyful thing when it happens. But for the most part, I see more hurt done, more pain, more suffering, more oppression done by having police in our communities the way that they've been set up thus far. I truly believe that there is a way for us to build our communities up for the majority of our people in an imperfect system to have their needs met. And by having those needs met, we no longer need police in the way that supposedly, in my 40 years on Earth, 39 of those, I've been told we do. So I want to bring those personal reflections and have you sit with that. Thank you so very much for all your work.
Thank you, Amy. And Ashwin, who I believe is our last person who wants to, but I think Rice got in there too. So we'll try to limit public comment after Rice. So Ashwin?
Yes, hello. Thank you all so much once again for all of your work on this commission. Again, my name's Ashwin. I'm a environmental studies professor at Amherst College, and I also happen to be on Amherst's Energy and Climate Action Committee. And I'd just like to reiterate something I said at the city council meeting last week, connecting issues around climate change and the environment to the calls to defund the police and to make fundamental changes to how we think about public safety. So I'm so excited about the broader historical and political moment that we're in right now, because the Biden administration, for all of its limitations, has passed some really important executive actions on climate change and on racial equity, calling for massive refocusing of the Department of Housing and Urban Development to address racial inequity, and calling for large amounts of funding from the federal government to go towards environmental justice communities, communities that have been harmed disproportionately by pollution. And I think that readjusting and transforming the budget of Northampton by defunding the police and building new systems that are capable of taking care of people and are accountable to people is not only the right thing to do, given what the movement for Black Lives is calling for and the history of racist policing in this country, but it will set us up to take advantage of these tremendous opportunities that are coming through the pipeline from the federal government and hopefully soon the state government. So I really hope you'll take that into account as you craft your recommendations. So I personally work with Indigenous communities in the Global South to advocate for resources and support to advance their vision of conserving tropical forests, which are super important for climate change. But the thing that we always come up against is that there isn't a big mass political movement calling for countries in the global north to redistribute funds to the global south to address climate change. And as a result, we end up having to support these sort of moderate tinkerings on the edges of things, market-based solutions, small incentives here and there that really aren't adequate to the task of pushing back against all of the forces that seek to destroy tropical forests and conserve them. And, you know, the reason I bring this up is because in this country last summer, we actually did have this mass historical, amazing movement for Black lives that was calling and creating the political energy to do something really big and bold, like defunding the police and fundamentally shifting our priorities. And in that context, I really hope that you'll be bold and seize that opportunity, because it's an opportunity that I'd do anything to have in the type of work that I do. On that note, just to reiterate something that Yaping pointed out earlier, I've been watching the Policies and Services Subcommission with some concern, because despite messages from people who have been affected by policing, despite rigorous evidence that organizers and commissioners even have presented showing how some of these reforms like oversight boards and body cams and implicit bias training are ineffective, there are some members of that commission that persist in sort of stubbornly insisting that those types of reforms go into the report. And I'm really concerned that that would squander the energy of this moment. And I'm just kind of confused about why that's in there, because it seems to me that it would be cruel.
Have to start terminating you, Ashwin, just if you could finish your thoughts.
So I'm just confused
sorry.
about why that is, and I hope that you will reconsider those positions and advocate boldly to defund. All right, thank you.
Thank you. So sorry to do that.
That's okay, thanks.
Rai, and Rai will probably be our last speaker and comment, right?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Little louder?
I have always with this problem. I apologize.
For me anyway, a little louder.
More of your time. I will turn up my Zoom input level. Is that better?
Very good. Thank you, Rai.
Great. Thank you for making time for public comment. I want to take a brief moment to comment on the Policies and Services Subcommittee meeting from last night. Last night, this subcommittee proposed including public comment for the first time, and I support this and hope that I will be able to direct these comments directly to the subcommittee in the future. This subcommittee has mentioned several times that you can't get the full story of police practices just from talking to police. Yet this commission has not allowed public comment, and so far has directed a lion's share of its attention to the police website, information from Chief Casper, and a meeting with Chief Casper. I hope that in the closing weeks of this commission's work, this subcommittee will direct attention toward the people affected by towards the narrative of people affected by policing, as Elizabeth suggested at the end of last meeting, and not towards more investigation of the police's narrative. I also want to I appreciated that the police's policies and practices committee did not dwell on the idea of a civilian review board last night. Commissioners made many great points as to why it was not a useful place for reform, including that the review process is internal, union contracts prevent enforcing any kind of accountability, and restorative justice does not work with a power imbalance. I would like to add that police will always have the power to take the life and liberty of civilian oversight board members, while civilian oversight board members have no ability to hold police accountable. It just from the start, just the base logic and power dynamics can never work. And this has been found by many of your peers and predecessors doing police review all across the country. And lastly, for the full commission, I want to really encourage this commission to think about creating a new department. This was something Cynthia talked about at the subcommittee meeting last night, and I've heard other people talk about this, and I think it is just a great way to create infrastructure that is lasting and create a home for this work to continue and for our community to be cared for. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rai. Thank you, everyone. Again, want to remind folks, you can always contact us through the Police Commission website and also through NOAA, who can get us the great links and information that you've sent us in the past. So we did it, and there are no more folks waiting in line. I hope I didn't scare anybody away with sort of a strict time limit. The next item on the agenda is acknowledgement of gender imbalance. Just wanted to take the lead on that and acknowledge just very briefly, but so many folks in public comment did that much better than I could. Yes, we know we've talked about this before, and we know we've lost another female gender identified individual in the commission, and we just want to make sure we're aware of that loss and all the losses that have occurred, and several attempts to try to fill those slots, but I think we're in the sort of rounding the corner beyond the halfway point, doing the best we can, but just to acknowledge the fact that there will be a dominance of another gender voice in the commission, and just to remind folks of that. And that's all we wanted to do with this particular segment on the agenda. If there are any comments about that, or if there are not any comments, anybody wants to talk about that issue, we can move to the discussion of the final report. Anyone want to say anything on that? I'm seeing Namdi and
sure.
Michael.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I on the matter of the absence of gender, the diminishment of women's voices on this commission, and particularly the loss of women of color, kind of raised a couple times. I think we could imagine a process to continue to include the voices of people who have left our commission, who basically have been unable to make these meetings and dedicate the time. We might invite them to have a kind of commenting role on the final report, or on the draft before it comes together. It might be something we could discuss or vote on. Just, I'm imagining some role that recognizes there's a difference between being here and present, and you wouldn't have the same sort of authorship role. But if the real issue is making sure that voices are represented, voices are present, you're sort of saying if you were ever a member of this commission, you would have an opportunity to kind of add an addendum, add a section, add a comment. And so your voice really would in some way be represented. So I guess I want to put that forward as an idea of a way to, not ideal, but it would be a way to not have a total loss.
Thank you, Namdi. I think, Michael, you had your hand up, and then Carol.
I did, and I'll just go quickly. I heard Namdi say that in your subcommittee meeting as well as at the full commission, and support the idea as well.
Thank you. Carol?
Yeah, just a second or third that that sentiment that I think we would be highly remiss if we did not make a place in the final report to talk about some things that some very critical structural and process things that we have learned as a group that sort of parallel a lot of power dynamics in larger society, and that it's critical, and that we don't want to lose these voices and these intents, and perhaps, as Namdi has said, leave a place for their voices to actually come in.
Thank you, Carol. I'm seeing Javier.
Yeah, I want to second Carol and even more put a little more stress into some section about the power dynamic and specifically about the power dynamic. I do agree with the essence of what Namdi is proposing, but I honestly find it meaningless even if we have those voices are not being listened. And I think that's an issue, and I agree with the essence of it, but I also see the dynamics existing. And that's the reason why I support having it, as long as it's with what Carol commented, which is also a description of the power dynamic and how that play along.
Thank you, Javier. I just want to make sure, Carol, is your hand still up, or did you have something else to say? Okay, I think we want to take all these into consideration, all these ideas, as we do the final report, and somehow find a way to acknowledge so many things that have happened with the loss, and also acknowledge the folks that were here, and for a variety of reasons, and we may never know all of them, why they left, but it was sad to see them go. So Dan, you were having some technical issues. Are you back on? Okay, good. Do you want to lead us into the final report process?
Yeah, sure. So hopefully I'll be good. Looks like I'm good for the moment. I'm going to share my screen. Everyone should have received this as a PDF in an email, but it's a draft. I want to highlight draft. And give me a moment, I'll zoom in. I realize it's not the most easy to read thing in a shared screen, but the draft that Cynthia and I came up with, is essentially that we have, that we would do, so we don't have a lot of meetings left. If we met every week, this is the schedule that we would have for the full commission. We would like to meet each week, but reduce the meeting time to 2 hours maximum. And then for the majority of the meetings that we have left, really have a specific set of topics that we discuss so that everyone on the commission is sort of on board with them, understands what they're doing. And that's really just to really increase the communication that we have, to make sure that we're not duplicating work, and that at the end we can create something that's a sort of a coherent narrative around all of what we've done and what we're recommending and why. The initial report that we had, that was very much cut and paste, this subcommittee says this subcommittee says that was fine. But we really want to refine and craft something that's a really good guide to what we would like the city to do. So the path forward would be essentially meeting. We would have the 2 public hearings that would be scheduled, one for February 11th and the other for March 6th. The rest, otherwise, it would just be the single general commission meeting each week, and then the subcommittees meeting as their schedules align, sort of imagining a pretty steady pace. We have each of the meetings here just in terms of by subcommittee, and obviously we can refine these as they go. This is just sort of like a rough outline, and subcommittees should be, feel free to make changes to what they would like, and we can make changes to this document at any point. It's just a draft, but it's really sort of working on final recommendations, working on drafts. If there's projects that people are doing, if there are reports that people are drafting or preparing, just making sure that everything stays on task. Sort of entering the project management phase of this. Until we get to our final commission report. our commission report, or the presentation is on March 18th. One thing that's not on here, but we'll probably discuss a little bit in this process, is also a sort of wrap up to go over the presentation. I think actually, sorry, March 14th is the discussing that final presentation to make sure that, you know, what we hit on, what we highlight in that presentation is something that we're all okay with, that we understand what's going forward, and also to discuss a sort of appendix for recommendations to improve how commissions function in general. I think a lot of us are sort of outside the commission experience and have questions, concerns, thoughts in terms of how that can be approved. And we can also work with the folks who left. And that was one of the purposes of this, was to really highlight why people were leaving, why people didn't feel like they could participate, and then maybe recommend ideas or ways forward for the city to increase that participation as well. You know, even though that's outside of what our report is, I think it would be very important for us to have that piece. So this would be the process. So we would essentially have basically 5 meetings to really hammer home different topics and discuss them, see where different subcommittees are, because I think we're also hitting the point where a lot of the subcommittees are touching on very similar things, if not the same thing, in different words. I'll give an example of the community care, Department of Community Care, Department of Community Safety, Department of whatever that's outside of the police department. I think I've heard that in all of the different subcommittee meetings. So we should talk about what that means, where we think that might fit, what are the concerns, or what are the roles that we want that to have, and what relationships with other departments. So really crafting this, and it goes, you know, some of that is what already exists in the city. What are the policies? What are the services that would need to provide? And then, you know, from the alternatives perspective, how does that, you know, how does that sort of take form or shape, as an example? And I think most of the subcommittees have at least referenced this or talked about it a little bit, but just wanted to see, we wanted to see how folks feel about this. Does this seem doable, achievable? Are there concerns that people have? Alex?
Thank you both for putting this together. I just had some date questions. So first, March 6th is a Saturday. Wanted to make sure that was intended. And then for the third public hearing. And then March 14th is a Sunday for our last meeting, the full commission meeting. Was that correct?
Nope, that's my bad. I apologize. That should be, I think, the 16th. But the Saturday hearing is intentional. That was one of the concerns, was that weeknights for people who are working, who have families, especially when it's like at 7 at night, which is the time for young children to be heading to bed or getting ready for it, that was really limiting what we could do. So this is one way to open up those meetings to other folks.
Great. Yeah, that sounds good.
But I will adjust that March 14th date. Booker?
So was that Saturday public meeting going to be like in the afternoon? Do you have proposed hours for when that meeting will occur?
We don't have a time for that yet. So that's something that we can discuss. If it's, an afternoon or around lunchtime, something like that, we can work on those. We do want to decide sooner than later, just so we can start publicizing it through all the different channels. But we haven't decided on times for those yet.
I think it's a great idea to have a Saturday meeting. I would also urge that we either have it late morning or early afternoon to sort of meet the other requirements that you were bringing up.
All right. While we're on that, I'm just going to throw it out there. Does, say, 11 work for people? We did 11 a.m. All right, I'm seeing thumbs up. Does anyone not, would anyone not be able to make that? Okay, so I'm going to put it down. Oop.
Hey, it's Chris. Sorry, that might not work.
Okay.
For me.
Okay. So is there another? Do you know when you would know if that would work?
Probably within the next day or so.
Okay.
I can get back.
Yeah, why don't you let me know? There's a couple different ways that we can tackle this. We don't necessarily have to have a quorum to hold that public meeting, but I also don't want to exclude somebody. There is something that at least I find really valuable about hearing and having that time. So why don't you let me know? We'll tentatively put that at 11 a.m. on on March 6th.
March 6th. Okay.
Dan, I just need to say that I'm tentative for that date. If it's held in the morning, I can move my thing to the afternoon. It kind of depends on what time the meeting's held, but I'll do my best to attend it.
Okay. Does anyone else have temporal concerns? Alex?
Not a concern, but I believe we do need to have a quorum to hold the hearing, but we don't have to have everyone.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah. But I don't want to exclude anybody right off the bat if, saying like, oh, I know you can't make it and we're doing it. Cynthia?
Yeah, not scheduling issue, but just something for us to think about. And Alex and Michael, you might have more experience with this, but public hearings are often in reaction to something. And so if we wanted to put out a sketchy document or concept or something so that in writing, so that the public can react to it. That's another thing for us to think about, as opposed to having a 2-hour public comment on anything, which is fine as well, but public hearings are a distinction. It's been my experience from general comment.
On that note, just because it is coming up, we have the February 11th public hearing. Does that work? Or I guess, yeah. Is that a time that folks think they can make if we have a quorum? I'm getting a bunch of thumbs up. So I think I would propose, just like we did before, that it have a 6 p.m. start. Does that work for folks after the workday? All right, so I will put that down as well. Great. All right, and then I guess the next question is, does anyone have any other questions or concerns about this as an overall process? Does that make sense to folks? Are there any major concerns? Javier?
Can you hear me?
Yep, there we go.
There you are. Sorry, I'm eating. So I have a question in relationship to the material that the outreach subcommittee is going to be gathering, and the consensus and how that's going to be shown. If that's something that we can, I mean, what I would like is to see the full commission would just rely into the outreach committee to take the decision how that's going to happen, and the outreach subcommittee work with the chairs to make that happen. So we don't have to have a extra meeting item, extra agenda item. But I would like to see when we can sort of touch base with that.
So you mean like in terms of talking about the results?
No, and in relation to if during the public speaking, we're going to have, if it's an audio recording, if it's somebody reading a letter, a narrative that somebody submitted, there has to be some kind of consensus in how that's going to be shown. My question is if it would be enough for the full commission to trust in the outreach subcommittee to make that call together with the chairs. So we don't have to add anything. If we can just solve that problem pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. So I think what Javier is getting at is that the outreach committee is working to gather statements from different people, either audio, video, or written statements, or depending on the groups that we're working with, summaries or collective statements from them, and then how to include that as part of the public hearing, with the idea that the people that we're working with are unable to attend those public hearings, but we want to give their comments and weights the same. We want to give their comments the same weight as someone who can attend those meetings. So we've gone through a number of different ways that might sort of be presented back, including playing audio, still limiting it to the same 3-minute time limit or whatever time limit that we decide for that. I believe the last one was 5 minutes in terms of public comment, but making sure that everybody has a chance to be heard in that venue. Booker?
I'm hoping, first thing, I agree that if I'm willing to give that decision to those co-chairs of that committee, but I also have a preference that if there's a way that whatever information can be gleaned can be brought up within one of the public statements, that would be preferable. In whatever format. And I actually think that Saturday meeting might be a really good place to sort of see that. Because frankly, I'm afraid that if we bring in comment in a different way, it won't quite have the same power as what happens when we're watching the public comments occur, and also everybody else is watching the public comments occur. So number one, I'm comfortable with Javier and other chairs making a decision about how to do that. But I'm hoping that those voices can be heard within one of the larger public comment sessions in whatever way you can come up with that keeps everybody safe.
Yeah, great. Javier?
That's a really good point, the one that Booker is raising. And to be honest, this was a point that Dan raised a couple of meetings ago in the outreach subcommittee. And intentionally, we're trying to gather all those in audio format, video format, or written to be able to be presented during the public speaking, because we're cognizant of how you, Booker, said how impactful is to hear those testimonies and those comments in context, right? So we're working towards that.
All right. So it sounds like we have at least some folks that are in favor of that. Is there any other discussion? Nick?
I want to think about the public hearings and whether there will be a time limit on the public hearings, because what's being discussed right now will affect the timing of things in the public hearings. And I don't know how long the outreach input would be in the hearing. Last public hearing was, I believe, over 4 hours long. And maybe it's on our agenda. Maybe it's a topic for us to discuss the way we want to structure that hearing.
Yeah.
Or if we're gonna structure it the same way.
So we can definitely bring that up. It's not on the agenda for tonight, but we can add that. I would say that I think the public meetings are going to be the ones that, or the public hearings are going to be the ones that take time. And I think it is important for us to make sure that we've sort of blocked out and we hear those voices at that and like give them that time. And I know everyone is busy with like life and work and personal lives and pandemic lives and things like that. But especially when, you know, it's hard to stay on top of everything that we're doing, but these are the voices that we are ultimately accountable to. So I think it's important that we all hear them. So we could definitely talk about like limiting public comment to 3 minutes instead of the 5. And that would take down some of that time, or have it be a 4-minute comment or something like that.
You know, it's not our agenda item right now, but one thing might be having a 15-minute break in there. I mean, it's just a way to kind of recharge so we can really hear everybody. It's a long stretch, nonstop.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So why don't I put that as the next agenda item, or an agenda item for the next meeting, although as a note, our next meeting is on the 9th, which would leave 2 days for the public comment. But we can still just say that it starts at 6 p.m. To leave that and leave it open beyond that. So on the process as a whole, are there any other questions? Javier?
Yeah, I just want to point out, you know, after talking for 10, 15 minutes about including all the voices, let's have that in mind when we start talking about how much time these testimonies of affected community members are going to be brought and how much time they are going to take. I would like to have that in consideration by the commission.
All right. Is there any other discussion on that, on the process that we have? Or the calendar so far? Okay. So we have 2 other parts to this agenda item, and then we'll be finished. One is just the working, and this is something that we can do as we're going along, but think about what recommendations we really want to talk about first, since we'll be talking about them next week, presumably. And I mean, we can think broadly and start planning out all of them, but I think especially if the subcommittees have had time or you've started to think about it because you've seen this, what is really important that we as a commission, what you think we might have consensus on, and also, or some form of consensus. There's so many different models, but where there might be agreement, where there's overlap around the committees, and things that we can, or maybe just important ideas that we can bring together, that we've had from different folks. And then the other is just sort of a process question of like, do we feel comfortable having the subcommittee chairs and the co-chairs just meet to finish outlining where the committees are and what their work will be in that document? Does that make sense to everyone in terms of what we need to? So we have a 45-minute discussion and it was just those items. So I want to keep us on there. So if we start with the process for going forward, is it looking mostly for the subcommittees chairs, but do you feel comfortable reaching out, or us reaching out to you and letting you and sort of filling in that table? Booker, you're muted.
I was comfortable. I was actually going to bring up a slightly different issue, and we can come back to it later. I shared with the Alternatives Committee the document that you put up, and we could see that timeline. I'm uncertain about, I would personally feel uncomfortable about representing the Alternatives Committee in a final meeting with the chairs about what we're proposing, because there are members of my committee who I think bring a lot of strength to that discussion, and I would feel uncomfortable making a decision without them being present. But more importantly, the real concern I have is stylistically, are we going to write proposals or are we going to report, or are we going to recommend, here's what needs to happen? It's a big difference between a proposal and here's what we're asking to have happen. So I guess I'm bringing more explicitly the question, the dance that we're doing at the moment of how are we going to do this? And we could put this to a later part of the discussion, but I actually think this drives how we will write a list of here's things that we think would be really nice, and or a list of things that we think need, I can't even, I don't want to use the word demand. I'm uncomfortable with that from my organizational, institutional, how I work with the world way of being. But we may need to write something closer to that, I think, to have change occur. And I guess that's what I'm really asking, because I think there's a big difference between, I'll go on a limb here. I feel like in a really good place to make demands about mental health alternatives. I don't feel anywhere close to being close to demands about, for instance, restorative justice protocols, except that the police shouldn't be doing them. So, but that's something I don't feel like we have enough information today. So I guess I want to play out, if this is an okay place to do it, this discussion of the formatting of what we're going to actually do.
Yeah, I think two separate parts there. So the first one just on process, and then Carol, I will grab you. I think you're going to respond to the second part, which is great. When it comes to process, and we talk about just meeting with the co-chairs, I was just sort of filling in that table of what you see for your subcommittee in terms of the timeline and process. So not really, you're not deciding necessarily what the topics are or anything like that. And it wouldn't be, at least, and I don't want to speak for Cynthia, but I don't think either of us wanted to be sort of the arbiters of this makes it in and this doesn't. So it would be bringing those recommendations. If you wanted to list out what recommendations you were thinking about, bringing forward, wanted to talk about to the whole commission, to present where you are, where you're struggling, where you might want additional insight, or where there's overlap, that's a separate part.
That's very helpful, and then thank you for saying that, and I would be comfortable with that.
And then Carol, I'm gonna jump over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, Dan, to bring it back to the commission. I've been concerned for a while, and I think probably others are too, about how we come to consensus. Because without, at some point in an earlier meeting, I said, oh, we don't need consensus. We can have all these different reports. And, I've thought about it and, and done some reading and reflecting. And it's like, you can't move forward with anything, any change, sustainable change, unless we achieve as a commission some consensus about some very specific recommendations. And then we can be very global and say in the future, blah, 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 but we really need to achieve consensus here as a large group of 15, or at least 15 with the other, input from other folks who have left. And so here's my concern. How do we switch from the format we've been in, which is parliamentary procedure and motions and seconds and votes, which is really how we've been doing decision, piling on and saying, I agree or don't agree. How do we transition from that format into consensus? I think we need, starting right about now, to, think of some other ways of sharing with one another, across subcommittees and even in this larger body. And somebody's got to facilitate that. Because when I've been in on consensus building groups, there's a clerk or there's a chair who's saying, I'm hearing this and I'm hearing that, and what do others, there's a strong facilitation role that needs to occur. So anyway, that's just what I'm thinking about and very concerned about.
Yeah, and I think this is something that was brought up before as well, is sort of making sure that we have a a model, and this is something that I feel pretty strongly about, that we should have a model of consensus making that is non-coercive, that gives people the ability to sort of really strongly disagree with things, and a space to do it, and a way to do it, and a way to engage, but that ultimately results in something that we can have that presents as unified as possible, a voice and a direction. I think really borrowing from like the Brattleboro report, the Austin report, a lot of the different reports that, at least that I've read that I found compelling, are the ones, and the ones that seem to have traction in governments are the ones that have that narrative that says, we, this body has produced this report. These are, not demands maybe, but this is the path forward. And you can decide, you can skip ahead, pretty far, but there's a path and there's a narrative structure that supports that. I think this is going to take some time. I think if everyone has a moment to spare to think about what the consensus models that you've had experience with, some people have already sent in a couple options, and we can have that as a short agenda item to talk about as well as we move forward. And I think this has already been said too, that I think for a lot of these things, we will start to have, I think we already have a lot that we agree on. So it'll be finding the way to encourage disagreement, productive disagreement, as we refine some of these. But I don't have a perfect answer either. Alex?
Thanks. I was just looking back at our charge, and we were charged to issue a final report with recommendations. However, those recommendations could be extremely strong. I mean, we can put that forward, but that is the charge that we have. And I was thinking about achieving consensus, and I think that I would suggest that we start in the areas that we feel like we do have near consensus on, and I think we can probably guess at some of those, and have those be the first topics, and really get those in, and then move to items that we're not sure. Just so that's one suggestion, to phase that in that way. And I agree with Carol, someone who's in my business life, in a cooperative for 18 years now, of where we make all our decisions by consensus. Having that facilitation role of someone who's listening to people and then saying, okay, here's where I see agreement, here's where I see disagreement, here's a potential path forward in agreement, and then reading that back to the commission, and then seeing, okay, do we have consensus on that and the areas where you don't, you can then have that process happen in between meetings, whether at another, in a subcommittee, or two people deciding to chat with each other, as long as it doesn't reach quorum, just to try to work out some of the issues, and then come back with a different proposal. So that's some suggestion for how we could move forward.
I like that idea. So what we'll do, part of the next agenda for the next meeting, will just be sort of consensus models. If folks have a chance and they want to outline what the consensus models are that they're familiar with, that they would propose, and then send that to NOAA so it can be distributed to the whole commission, and we can have a decent idea of at least what structures people are looking at or thinking of. I think that's going to be a really good start, just so that everyone's on the same page, and we only have to spend, I'm hoping, a reduced amount of time just talking about what those models are, and get to an agreement. I also say we can also have this be, a couple of minutes at each meeting as we approach the end as well. So it doesn't have to be something we immediately decide next week if we don't have agreement. Nick?
I'm not. I'm not sure if we have consensus on the value of consensus, but I think we might. I do agree with what's been said. The importance of embracing some kind of consensus model. I think it will make the report more meaningful. It will make it stronger. But my understanding of a consensus model is that there are different levels of consensus, and Alex, it seems like you have some experience in your business of practicing it, and I wonder if it wouldn't be, I don't know if it's possible to get somebody to talk with all of us, whether it's one of our own commission members or who has experience with it, or bringing in somebody outside who has done it. And as you may know, I forwarded a one-page model, and Kevin Lake worked with the city council on helping them develop a consensus practice. And I'm just wondering if spending 15 to 30 minutes getting a common idea about what our process is, somebody to kind of give us kind of a core idea of how we're doing this. Because if it's just yes or no, I don't think it will work. I think it has to be more nuanced than that. I wonder whether anybody has knowledge or experience to bring to this. And I also want to note, we also had one of our observers, Richard, send us a lengthy and detailed consensus model, which was quite lengthy. That was I haven't fully read it.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the bits that there's a lot of different models out there, and I think maybe having like a write-up of what the models are that people think work really well or have been effective that they've experienced in the past is a good way to sort of start. And then we can sort of work towards what consensus is, what the models are that have worked, and where we might see those being used.
Can I ask Alex, do you have a specific model that you use that would be applicable here?
We kind of have one that we've crafted ourselves over years, but it is based on some texts and some forms. So I can look for resources certainly to send to the commission.
Yeah, one of the things I want to note, and then I want to recognize Javier and Carol. I don't know if your hand is still up or not, but just thinking that a lot of consensus models take a very long time to build. You have to build relationships and trust and those sort of things that we have to do in a compressed time as well, which is something to take into account for that. Javier?
Thanks. Yeah, so two things. I was going to mention that for an entire consensus building exercise to come out, for something to come out based on that, it's going to take way longer than the amount of time that we have. It's not that we shouldn't do it or we should apply in certain way to make it work with the time constraint that we have, but we need to have that in mind. Also, I was going to mention the document that Richard Hendrick sent us, a practical guide for consensus-based decision-making. I know it's lengthy, but as I mentioned it in previous meetings, I think we need to start reading what we're getting, the material that we're being offered, at least thinking that at least we don't have to go and fish on the internet for it. And if we're not doing it, I mean, we have a month, 2 months left, or month and a half. I don't know. So I would just again invite people here to actually read the material that is being sent to us, even because, as probably we're discovering, is extremely relevant to what we're talking actually. So I would put that invitation on the table for the rest of the commission.
All right. So I've got that we have a consensus model discussion up. Are folks okay with, or is there any other comment that we want to add to that? Cynthia?
Yeah, I'm definitely for the consensus model. And to piggyback on it, I'm wondering, Dan, I'm talking out loud here. I wonder if it would be helpful if we provided an outline of what the final report could look like, just an outline, and just have a document to react to for us to kind of fill in those spaces, put the meat around the bones, so to speak. And I'm also, I don't know how others feel. I hope we can get, the committee work is so valuable, but I hope we can have one voice so that the committees kind of, we're all feeding into one kind of voice here so that we're not, I'm not going to say pitting committees, but it looks, I'm very conscious of a lot of the comments that were made about the policy committee. So I want to make sure we deal with those as a subcommittee and we're speaking in one voice. So just a recommendation. I don't know how people feel about that. And Dan, you and I can talk about it as well.
Yeah, I think based on the initial report, we could probably draft a really, really rough outline that would need a lot of work. I want to throw that out there. And it would have to be something that we're really open to changing. I think what we end up with is going to be very much different than that initial report, I think, in terms of the depth detail that we go into, but also in terms of even the ideas and the content, because it's still been an evolving process. Booker?
I think the rough outline is a really good idea. And that'll be like the first step towards seeing where some of us might be uncomfortable about what's getting suggested, and that would be really useful, I think. Also, I think we need to start coming up with a rough document before the third public meeting, because actually I agree with Cynthia that it'll be a much more rich public meeting if people have seen something that we're roughly working on, so that we start to hear comments about that. So I actually think there are dual reasons to get out this rough document, so that we sit with it and see what we're comfortable about, what we're uncomfortable about.
And that is, so on the March 2nd full commission meeting, we are supposed to discuss our final recommendations from subcommittees, but we are also supposed to release our preliminary document prior to the last hearing. So that was something that Cynthia had already thought of. I admit I did not, at least in that detail, but that's something that's on our list to do as well. So getting something out so that people can react, and then we can get those last comments from the public too. All right, the last part, Namdi?
I want to respond to Cynthia's request for the speaking with one voice, and I guess I feel like I want to express a dissenting view. I think that, from my point of view, I'm happy to speak with one voice where that's honest, where we can and where we do naturally. I think it would be ironic, surprising, and incorrect for a group that has placed such value on hearing all voices to artificially mute dissenting voices by pretending that there's a more consensus than exists. And so, I think, to me, the best product is one that amplifies the consensual voices, emphasizes them, prioritizes them, but also includes dissenting voices. The respect of minority views is core to what we should be about. And so I just want to say, expect me to be skeptical of speaking with one voice. if that's a lie.
Yeah, I don't think we want anything. I don't think we want coercive consensus. That's not the goal, but the goal is to have meaningful consensus and, again, like I said, productive disagreement. I think that's a really good and a strong way to go as we refine things. Cynthia?
Yeah, thank you, Nemdi. I wanted to just avoid having a report that says, here's the alternatives committee and here's the budget and contracts committee. That was really where I'm coming from, but I totally understand what you're saying. Thank you.
So the last thing that's on this part of the agenda is just thinking about next week and topics that we might want to put forward as recommendations that we should all be sort of discussing and thinking about. I would put up one that I think we've talked about individually, but has not necessarily cross-pollinated all the way, which is a new department. And sort of really thinking about where the different subcommittees have already been, where you think you might go, so that we can also sort of say what that department will do, what's the scope of that department, what's the process for that department. I think a lot of the other recommendations that we've been talking about sort of naturally fit into that. I'm not going to go into super depth now just because I don't think it's appropriate, but I want to propose that one. But I'd also like to know what other folks think that we should start discussing next week as something focused to talk about. And I have plenty of other ideas, but I really want to open this up. Javier?
I think the idea, was Booker, or maybe not, but I don't remember. Maybe it was Booker that is starting to talk about the things that we do have a high level of agreement. And I think in one of those, I feel that it's trying to move away from the police mental health related calls. So if we start from something that it's in the long term is going to work to address that issue, but at the same time as trust building among the commission to be able to talk about actually that we agree, I think would do sort of a dual work within the commission.
So thinking about a focused discussion on that. So that would be transferring mental health calls from the police. That's where, does that get expanded to transferring other calls, or do you want to focus on who responds to those mental health calls?
Yeah, I think that's also falls into that, right?
Okay.
I mean, if we're saying that police should not, a person with a gun should not go to those calls, even the second question is, but who is gonna, right?
Alex?
And I think we may, and we'll have to see if we do, but I think we may be able to add a couple of other types of crisis response, substance use, homelessness, and if we have time to discuss those as well in that topic of crisis response from a new department.
So David and then Carol.
Yeah, Dan, I like your idea. I personally feel that at some point very soon, we really need to talk nuts and bolts. And we need to talk starting with something that I think there is consensus on, as many people have said, is the mental health response. I've been looking into traffic stuff, which we've hardly talked about at all. There are plenty of other things that I think arguably the police should not be doing. And I think we need to talk about them in detail and to explain how these things would be taken care of by someone other than the police. But before we get there, I like your idea of starting with trying to get consensus around the idea that we need a new department to deal with these things that the police will not deal with. And I would also suggest that in that same conversation, we at least begin the discussion about funding. I don't really like the word defunding, but I think it's important that we, as a part of our ultimate recommendations, even if it's only symbolic, we say, look, the police budget needs to be reduced by X% to fund this new department. Even though I feel I wouldn't care if we need to pay for these things, whether it comes out of the police budget or not. I think it's important symbolically that it come out of the police budget. So I think if we start our conversation with those two things that I view as interrelated, and then in the following weeks, sort of get down to brass tacks, particular things that we're going to move from the police to this new department, I think that would be a pretty clear roadmap. And I'll just add before I shut up here, with hearkening back to something someone said before, but I think Booker said he doesn't like the word demand. I don't either, but I think we have to say it pretty strongly, or nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think the funding part is something that the spending and contracts, we've been looking at sort of where those avenues are, what are the mechanisms. But one thing is that I personally, I don't love defund either. I prefer reinvest, because that's really what we're doing, is just reinvesting in community. So you might see that language come up a lot. Carol, and then Javier.
And I like the language, building capacity. You know, I think we do have to link this to diminishing the finances of the police department. But for me, I think there needs to be consideration, maybe not everybody agrees with this, but consideration of how, what gets criminalized and what gets thrown over into the bailiwick, if you will, of the NPD are things that are, I see as social needs that have not been acknowledged and funded and dealt with. And so I want to make sure that there, even though there's the question of with this charge that we have on this commission, what does housing have to do with that, right? There could be a question. Well, I think it's quite relevant in that the lack of attention over the last few decades in this town and many towns to the need for affordable housing and shelter and, you know, the whole range of housing, not just single family, large houses that are developed, creates social situations that then get criminalized. So I think there's a link there. So there's, you know, I would want us to consider, what do we want to say about housing, not just shelter, but, you know, we've had some housing first, you know, material come our way. And, you know, do we want to do a piece on that? I vote for speaking to that need, because I think when social need is ignored for decades, what you have is you have behaviors then become criminalized, and then the police come in and people get tracked for a different system. It's called incarceration.
Yeah, all on board with having that be part of the conversation. And I think that's what a lot of the alternatives subcommittee's been doing, in terms of discussion that they can bring back to the whole commission. Javier?
Yeah, so two things. The first one is I agree with Carol, but it gets complicated, right? Because there are things that are, you know, they are not up to the local authority. It's, you know, a state and even federal. And that's make things more complicated to to deal with. Certainly, there are things locally that we can address, but having having in mind that we have a limited time, I would be good to to take a look before the meeting to those things that locally we can actually affect, that would put people in sort of a track that they would end up being detained and that would eventually escalate, right? The other is I just want to remind you that when in the public school system in Northampton, when you have a kid with behavioral issues and high need, and the school system doesn't have the resources and the capability to be able to deal with that children, what happened? That boy, girl, whatever, it's sent to a different district, Holyoke could be another, where they can actually receive that. And what does the public school system in Northampton does with that? They put the money. They pay the bill. So defunding or not defunding, I think is, for me, it's more divest and reinvest. If we're taking if we're agreeing that the police department should not do X and Y, they are not doing X and Y. So we need to relocate the resources used for that and being conscious of the resources to whatever we're moving that to be able to use. So we're divesting and reinvesting. The same way how in the same way how the school department has to do. This is not rocket science. I mean, this happens in other departments. So I just want the commission to think about that. And be cognizant that it's not revolutionary what we're talking here. It's done. I mean, during the school year, it's done if you have a high needs student that the district cannot address those needs. So I would invite people that may feel uncomfortable with that thing of taking the money from the cops away and putting it. It's systemically, we're already doing it with other departments.
So I just want to be cognizant of time, just as a heads up so that we have time. Really quickly, I'm just going to add that part of our commission charge is to study governmental investment that needs investment in needs that, if met, reduce crime. That's part of our charge, so that's something we can definitely explore. But really quickly moving on, for short updates from the subcommittees, just on what you've been working on and what you think we should know about for the next meeting. What you think we should know just in general going forward, just updates. We'll start with the alternatives subcommittee.
I think the most important thing that I'm looking forward to is, thanks to Alex, we have a meeting tomorrow night, which I'm hoping will be about domestic violence, though we're having speakers and we're trying to arrange. The more important thing is Wednesday after next, where Chief Casper is joining us for our meeting. And we'll be talking about current police response to some of the issues that we've actually just been talking about, quite frankly. So that's the most important thing I want the rest of the committee to know. But otherwise, I think our focus at the moment is on now trying to shift to getting more information about domestic violence, and also about alternatives to policing for harm reduction and substance abuse treatment. Does anyone on the committee have more to add to that?
Yeah. So it may be tomorrow or next meeting. I was not, just to clarify, I wasn't able to make it last Friday to the alternatives meeting. But the previous meeting we talked about bringing Nelquit to the table, and I got dates today from Booker, so they're either gonna be able to be tomorrow or next meeting. So it would be good for if some other commissioners can come in if they have enough time to be able to visit the alternate meeting. That would be great, because we're going to be having speakers talking about all these sort of sensitive topics.
All right. Anything else? All right. so we're going to move on to the Policies and Services Subcommittee.
Namdi, do you, okay if I just go ahead with this? No, maybe he's not there. We spent the last session reviewing a couple of issues. We spent some time on the complaint procedure, trying to understand it. And then we talked at more length about inviting the police chief. And I have confirmed that the police chief will be able to come to our next meeting on Monday. I believe that's February 8th at 6:30 p.m. I'm in the process of finalizing that. We have sent a list of questions to the police chief. I did listen to the alternatives meeting. I don't think our questions overlap that much with what the alternatives committee was talking about. So we seem to be asking about different areas of police practice. We also talked about, we do know that there are members in the community that have been sitting with us and have things to say. And we talked about opening up our meetings to some public comment, but that won't begin because next week, because the chief will be joining us. Does anybody else have anything to add? Thank you.
All right, sort of blazing through these, which is great. So the spending and contracts subcommittee, Josie, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So lately we've been kind of adding on to not only adding on to some of our initial points in the preliminary report, but also seeing what other sorts of information and ideas that we could add on to that to build like a wider swath of ideas. One of those things is kind of understanding the expenditures and the revenue streams of the Northampton Police Department, really kind of getting a sense of how the money moves through the system, and also what kind of contractual obligations and powers the city has over the police departments in terms of negotiating for their next contract, and also just generally speaking, like does the Northampton, so the city of Northampton have the ability to kind of set the amount of police officers and other such really important things that contribute to the overall expenditure of policing in general. So that's what we're going to be doing next tomorrow. That's what we're going to be doing tomorrow, as well as kind of looking at where we can reinvest some of that police funding into these new, hopefully potential, what are they called, departments for like air responders and some of the other things that the commission will be recommending. If anyone else wants to add on to that, you're more than free to.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add, just because it's something that I've been working on, looking at the Austin proposals that include a pretty significant budget cut, but a lot of the ways that they presented information, as someone who likes data visualization, it started to make me think of how can we present and think about some of the information that we have as well. So I'm hoping, I'm going to knock on wood, that I will have the capacity tonight to sort of bang out a couple more graphs and different ways to sort of organize that information. So we'll have that too. All right. Is there anything else?
Do you want the outreach to talk?
All right. Yes.
The subcommittee that you're part of.
So unless I have it in like the list in front of me, I just forget. I'm sorry. Yes, the outreach, please.
So so we are on the verge of having the sort of the one pager ready to go. We are having our next meeting on Thursday, and hopefully we're going to be able to finalize that document there. But also, we were working on an online form. And that's something that you then were going to send a couple of emails and trying to figure it out how that would be posted on the city website. We sort of did some list of outreach that need to be done, baseline in relationship to possible adding the newspaper, radio, local businesses, and how that's going to happen. And hopefully all the conversations are going to be done on Thursday meeting. If Carol or Dan has anything else to add to it, feel free to do it.
Yeah. I think one thing to note, just because we have not heard back from the city IT for a number of weeks. So I'll keep circling back, but also thinking about alternatives to using the city resources as well. So what else we can do if the response isn't as fast as we'd like. So, all right. We'll wrap up just with announcement. Oh, Alex?
If I could just go back briefly to the topic recommendations. How are we going to have that topic recommendation for the following week on every agenda going forward, or should we be submitting topic recommendations to you and Cynthia? What's the plan for that?
Yeah, so I think the goal is to not repeat unless, you know, there like a major change has happened. I think all of these things our understanding is going to become more nuanced than our actual recommendations might be iterative. But if we can get the bulk of that that set beforehand, so if we talk about something in one week, we might reference it, but not have it be like that's the topic for every week going forward. I think that becomes sort of a waste of our time in there. So if you do have topic recommendations, I would send them to Cynthia and myself. And so we can sort of organize them and get that conversation going. And as well, if there are short, brief, or extremely relevant materials that you want to send them to us as well, so that we can make sure that everyone has access to them beforehand, so we can spend as much time as possible focusing on what we actually need to discuss. So we're doing all of our asynchronous work and then coming together to do that decision making and that sharing. Nick, and then Booker, I think I saw you as well.
I feel like I really liked Cynthia's suggestion, and other people seem to like it as well, of starting to develop an outline. And I think it would be an excellent basis for organizing our discussions going forward. And I feel like we actually started to do some of that tonight. There were a number of things that were brought up that people said, we want this in the final report. We want something about the commission process in the final report. We want something about housing in the final report. Clearly, there's a lot of discussion about an alternative model with a separate department. I don't know how we move that forward, but I don't think it would hurt to have it on the agenda and to see if we could start to develop something like that. Maybe a couple of people working on it. I don't know.
So I think Cynthia and I are going to meet on Thursday evening. So I think one of the things that we can do is sort of hash out what a rough outline would be and then share that with the commission. We'll send it to Noah and they can share it out so that we'll have that sort of rough document, and then we can sort of improve, revise, iterate, and then build out our report.
I think that would be excellent. I totally, I really like that idea.
So then Booker and then Michael.
I want to come back to the idea of a new department. I just want to find out I understand this is not final proposal stuff. Are we thinking about a new department that is the way that we put something institutionally in place to attempt to champion the proposals for alternatives to the current form of the policing method? So rather than making just a proposal of change, that we're also proposing a structured part of the government whose job would be tasked to institute those changes. Is that what the quote, the new department idea is?
So I think that's one of the things that we would talk about next week, just because there are those competing ideas. Personally, I would love to see something that's government funded, that there's infrastructure for those things, that's not just a yearly grant, so that there's permanence and things like that. But there's also a sort of like, are they doing a task, or are we saying figure out more of what you need to do, and follow through? So I think there's room for.
So the idea for fleshing that out, do you think that sits within one of the subcommittees, or does that sit with the larger commission?
So I would say that's a little bit of both, which is why I think having these topic, discussions so that we can all be on the same page. And then as we bring it back to our subcommittees, I'm not imagining that that it would just be, we talk about this the one time and that's completely the end of all communal discussion on these things. I think, if there's iterations, if we talk, we work together, we think about this, we write up, we're going to be, I think, sharing documents, back and forth in terms of what these things are as we flesh them out and work together. And as subcommittees work together, it doesn't necessarily have to be, I don't think it's useful to talk about a new community cares department every week. But if we talk about it, it goes back to the subcommittees, they sort of flesh out ideas and then come back with, oh, there was a radical change, some major difference, then it behooves us to really work and to iterate what we've done. Does that answer your question? Okay, awesome. So Michael?
I haven't set a date yet, but I was invited by Bob Flaherty from WHMP to come onto his show and discuss the work of the Northampton Policing Review Commission. I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. Once the date is set and I have an idea of the time, I'll send it to Noah so that everybody can just be aware. I just wanted you all to be aware of it. Thank you.
That's going to be my next the wrap up. But all right, I think that covers our meeting time for today. We've gotten through the agenda. Looking for a motion to adjourn. I think that David's motioning to adjourn.
But yeah, move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, so David moved to adjourn. I think Alex, I heard you second it. Noah, can you count us off? Or sorry, is there any discussion? All right, Noah, can you count us off?
Yeah. Booker,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Josie, somewhere. Josie is still muted. Cynthia,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Right, our meeting is adjourned. See you all either at another meeting or next week.
Bye.